Section 3, Birth of the American Republic. How did the ideas of the Enlightenment lead to independence and the founding of the U.S. of America, U.S. of A? So by the end of the section, the characteristics of Britain and the 13 colonies. So we can kind of start to see where they're starting to split off from each other a little bit. Some of the key events leading to the American Revolution, the events and significance of, and then how the new Constitution reflected the ideas of the Enlightenment and some of the things we've already talked about. So if we look at Britain, in the 1780s, they've really kind of become the global power. They have colonies all over the world, pretty much. I think the saying is the sun never sets on the British Empire because somewhere in the world, the sun is over a British colony. So it kind of gives you an idea. So what set them up to do that? One is they're an ideal location, being an island nation that really helps with trade. Their business climate in that they kind of embrace Adam Smith's laws a little bit earlier than lots of others. They still have some mercantilist policies, and we'll see that leading to some problems. But for the most part, free enterprise and free markets have taken control. When we look at all the problems that we've talked about, especially last chapter, they tended to come out on the winning side of things, and rarely, if ever, did they come out on the losing side. So they always kind of benefited from things. By this point in time, they're very united at home. Wales and Scotland and Ireland have all become part of Great Britain, and so that helps. And one of the things that we also see is that King George III is the first George that's born in England. He speaks English, and he is bent on kind of reclaiming some of the lost power that had been taking place over the last century or so. So that's going to lead to some issues. If we look at the colonies, for a long time, Great Britain just kind of didn't really enforce all of their mercantilist policies, again, for a variety of reasons. One is the colonies were so far away. The other thing is they were busy doing other things and had other problems and other concerns. And so smuggling had kind of become widely accepted, and many founding fathers made a pretty good living from being smuggling. So it's kind of hard to discount that. And the other thing is when we look at the colonies, they're socially and politically very diverse, which Great Britain wasn't. And so when you have all that diversity, there's an openness to discussion in this country that maybe doesn't exist other places. And there's a lot more equality and egalitarianism here, where people just view each other as social equals. I mean, that's not true of every single one, but in general, there's an opportunity here for people to rise up. And so that in a lot of ways that evens the playing fields in some instances. And so you have these two very different places, and they've kind of grown apart is really what happens. Trouble really kind of begins with the Proclamation of 1763. So after the end of the French and Indian War, Great Britain is in big-time debt. And so they issue the Proclamation of 1763, which prevents colonists from moving over the Appalachian Mountains into what is today Kentucky and Tennessee and those places. The other thing is Great Britain is looking to try and figure out ways to put money back into the treasury. So they passed the Sugar Act, which is an import tax on sugar. The one that causes maybe the most trouble is the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act was an act that you had to buy a stamp to put on all kinds of different paper items, playing cards, newspapers, official documents, so like marriage license, birth certificates, that type of thing. That is really irksome for the colonists for a couple of reasons. One is every time they buy a piece of paper, they also have to dig extra money out of their pocket to pay for the stamp, which goes on top of the document or the playing cards or whatever. So they can physically see the money that Great Britain is making, and they physically have a representation of that in the stamp. And so because that's visually there, and because they know they have to take extra money out to pay it, that really irritates them. Plus, the only purpose of it is to generate more income. There's a big backlash for the Stamp Act. And eventually Great Britain has to repeal it. But what they replace it with was the Declaratory Act, which says we can pass laws because, gosh darn it, we're the mother country and we can do whatever we want and you have to do what we say. And so it's kind of like when you ask your parents, why do I have to do this? And they say, well, because I said so. That's the Declaratory Act. So over time, there's going to be more and more discontent, and you start to see these tensions rising. So one is the Boston Massacre. You have a group of people who are gathered. They're taunting soldiers. They're throwing snowballs, and there's all kinds of pushing and shoving. And depending on the account, you suddenly hear what seems like a gunshot, and then the soldiers fire into the crowd, and 5 colonists are killed. And so this becomes kind of a rallying cry for the colonists. The Tea Act, which is another kind of interesting event, because really when you look at the tea tax, what it did is it was meant to bail out the East India Tea Company. It actually lowered the price of tea in the American colonies, yet they dumped the tea overboard. So really what this has come down to is they dislike the fact that Great Britain is taxing without the authority of the colonists, no taxation without representation. So the leaders from many of the colonies, almost all 13, go to the First Continental Congress and they start to discuss these problems and develop a plan for what they're going to do. And then you have Lexington and Concord. Tensions continue to increase. There's fighting at Lexington and Concord of April 1775. So the Second Continental Congress moves up their meeting time this summer of 1775. And again, talking about what they want to do, what are the plans. And they do start moving forward on ideas of declaring independence. But you got to keep in mind, this is the summer of 1775. Independence isn't declared for a whole entire year. So they're also going to send olive branch to the King of England. They're going to try and work these things out as best they can. The Declaration of Independence is heavily influenced by Locke. It's in 3 different parts. The first part is the intent, or the principles of enlightenment. That's basically where the colonists express what they think good government looks like. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And they go through all these different things that they think a good government does. The second part is a list of grievances. They have 25 to 30 specific things, for example, depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury. So they aren't getting their right of habeas corpus. And so they have a list of all these problems that they have. And the last part dissolves ties, where they formally break in, and declare their independence, that we're going to act like a fully independent country. And when you look at this, it's kind of interesting because the colonists in the Declaration of Independence actually wish Great Britain well. Basically they're saying we'd like to be friends with you, we'd like to continue our relationship and trade with you, and as long as we're in peace, that's the way we'll go. But if you want to fight us, and we're going to fight back. So the American Revolution, when you look at this, it kind of goes through the advantages and disadvantages for both Great Britain and the United States. When you look at it from the outside, it sure looks like Great Britain has the upper hand, and for the most part they do. The big problem they run into is that the United States probably has a better cause, and the U.S. is fighting on their home turf. And that really kind of is the big thing, is the cause and the home turf gives the American colonists a little bit of the upper edge. On top of that, you also have a number of countries, when we talk about the balance of power, a number of countries are looking to kind of help Great Britain look bad. And so we get a number of individuals who are either motivated by helping their own country out. So for example, if Great Britain loses, France actually comes out winning. But you also have a number of people who are inspired by these Enlightenment ideas. And so you've got individuals who come from Prussia, you've got individuals who come from Poland, from Spain, from France, from all over that kind of help. The other thing that comes out of the American Revolutionary period is there's a lot of myths and legends that come out of this that just simply aren't quite true or factual. And a lot of these pop up in the 1820s and 1830s when we're defining ourselves as a country. And we go back to that revolutionary period, and that's when we create these mythical, almost near mythical events and people. But formally in 1781, the Treaty of Paris ends the war. So then we go on to creating a government. The first government's the Articles of Confederation. And what you see here is all the problems with the Articles of Confederation. They're too loose. They're really a firm league of friendship. They aren't a formal, strong national federal government. So it's too weak to be able to solve the problems that we have. So eventually what they do is they tear it up and they start all over and they create the new Constitution. And the new Constitution is heavily Enlightenment. Social contract, federal republic, separation of powers, checks and balances. You have a Bill of Rights. And so all of those things are in there to create this document where the power derives from we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. So it even starts off with this idea of a social contract. And this becomes a symbol of freedom, not just for the United States, but a symbol of freedom for people all over the world. And pretty soon we'll see other countries that gain their independence modeling their constitutions after ours.